If you're ready to meet the shadow and start taking your shadow work seriously, then you're also going to want to understand your archetypes and probably heal the child within. A bit of a corny introduction to 3 of the 6 shadow psychology books in today's video, and you can see that this is quite a long video, and it's because it's a mega curriculum review mashup to celebrate the launch of my shadow work library. These videos are lifted directly from my private course, and I wanted to share them with you so that no matter if you choose to join me in the library or just stay on YouTube here with me, you've got 6 high-quality, full-spectrum shadow psychology books to make a significant step forwards in your own personal healing and personal integration. I'm not going to keep you here for long. You're going to see each video in sequence. They are 6 of the 36 books in the curriculum. I can't share everything on YouTube, but I've tried my best to pick out some of the absolute best and give you it completely for free. So please enjoy, and if you want to see more of these videos, make sure to go into the description and click on the playlist where I'm going to be sharing even more behind the scenes, exclusive sneak peek content directly from the course. But I hope you enjoy in the meantime. Enjoy the first book, Meeting the Shadow. It's time to meet the shadow with Connie Zweig, Jeremiah Abrams, and over 50 authors in 65 essays in what I believe to be the metaphorical equivalent of a shadow work trampoline. So I hope that you've got your socks on, and I hope that your mother isn't watching from the window and telling you to not jump too high, because this is the book that I want you to read literally as a trampoline into further research. 65 essays ranging between 2 pages to about 15 pages per essay. This is the full study tour de force of shadow work from every single perspective, at least at that entry level, at least at that conversational level, getting your feet wet, dipping your toes in the water, and ultimately giving you the opportunity to launch yourself down into deeper areas of study. The reason that this book is what I believe to be the best single source introduction to shadow work is because if you're a focused reader, you will notice that certain essays like, that essay by John Sanford, or that one by Robert Bly, or that one by Sam Kean, certain essays will stand out to you and you'll go, I really liked that, I really liked what that author had to say, I wonder what else they've written. I read this book years ago at the beginning of my psychological exploration journey, and I just reflected before starting to film this video of about the 50 authors who are featured in this essay collection. 24 of them have at least one book, if not multiple books in this library, because this was my launching pad through going into the bibliography, looking for what the authors have also written into much deeper lanes of exploration. For example, in this essay collection, Sam Kean has a particular book on enemy making in particular. There we go. Sam Kean's essay, let's just bring it up there. The Enemy Maker, essay number 41 by Sam Kean. And of course, this course also features Faces of the Enemy by Sam Kean. And the reason I discovered that book is because of this essay landing in me and me liking his style. And then I went on to read a few more books by Sam Kean as well. It's a trampoline. It's a shadow work trampoline. It's time to launch yourself into the shadow from various perspectives. I'll give you an overview of what the book features, just a quick introduction to the chapters themselves. Here we have different sections. So part 1, what is the shadow? Part 2, shadow making, forming the disowned self in the family. Part 3, shadow boxing, the dance of envy, anger, and deceit. Part number 4, we have the disowned body, illness, health, and sexuality. Part number 5, the shadow of achievement, the dark side of work and progress. Part 6, meeting darkness on the path, the hidden sides of religion and spirituality. That's particularly good if you've ever been in a questionable kirtan or a shady meditation circle. You're going to see all of the spiritually grandiose guru wounds. Part number 7, Devils, Demons, and Scapegoats, a Psychology of Evil. That section is particularly valuable. We've got contributions by Carl Jung, Rollo May, Scott Peck, Stephen Diamond, Ernest Becker, and Andrew Schmookler, which is a wonderful last name, and I'm sure he's deep in his insights on acknowledging our inner split, because someone who's called Schmookler probably does have a few inner splits with that. No, that's me being mean. It's a fantastic name. It's just quite fun to say. Andrew Schmookler, get the book just for Schmookler's contributions. Anyway, part 8, enemy making, us and them and the body politic. That's going into political hatred and political shadows, and also in-group, out-group kind of thinking. Part 9, yes, we're still going, shadow work, bringing light to the darkness through therapy, story, and dreams. This is where we're starting to get a bit more clinical with the material. Again, some of these essays are literally just 1 page long, others are 5 or 6 pages. It's very much the kind of book that you could even keep in your bathroom and read a few essays per day and have it as a background book where you're sampling here and there. You've got your highlighter and you go, that essay was particularly good. Write in the margin source ? Or further books ? Or research ? Or exclamation mark if you want to be forceful in your studies. And then come back to the book, go on to your favorite secondhand bookstore or Amazon or your local bookshop and try and find more works by these authors. Part 10 in the book, owning your dark side through insight, art, and ritual. And I believe, yep, that is the end of the book. In about 300 pages, we've covered 65 essays spanning 10 different approaches towards shadow work. So where do we take this video from now? Well, how about the story of what this book will do for you? So in addition to the bibliography, trampolining from one book to another book and opening all the rabbit holes of inquiry, what I see as a particular benefit of this book when I recommend it to clients is that it can serve as one of the books that you're always reading in the background during the early stages. For example, this is the book, let's say this is book number 1, that will be on the side that you can dip in from and dip out from while you're reading a book on somatic therapy or deeper transpersonal psychology, and you need just a bit of a psychological break. If you're reading 3 or 4 books at once, which is something that I personally enjoy and personally recommend to get a variety of perspectives on this whole thing called human existence, this is the kind of book that will give you a break from the deeper studies, because you'll get almost you get essay, you get the equivalent of reading an article. It's a series of articles and essays, which means that you don't have to make such a great commitment in terms of time, energy, or focus when you're picking up this book. You can take 10 minutes, and that's enough for the day, and then go and spend 2 hours reading a different book on a deeper topic. It's not to say that this book is shallow, but it's a trampoline. It's not the end destination. It's an appetizer of shadow work. And at the same time, every client that I recommend this book to does come back to the sessions with insights about certain areas that they want to go into, because the doors are in the keys. The keys are in the doors, not the doors in the keys. The key goes into the door opens, and it opens just a little bit where they can peek inside and go, oh, I really need to look at my political shadow, or, oh, I really need to look at my sexual shadow. And then they can find books based on the authors that go deeper into these topics, because the people who've been chosen for this essay collection have usually written more books on that exact topic, and it works so wonderfully. It's such a great book. It's one of the essential books that everyone should buy if you are paying attention to what you want to get from this course. This is one of those books. Final summary to leave this off with about the benefits of shadow work. Of course, so much more that we're going to cover in the actual lessons, but for the sake of this review, from the book, what is the point of shadow work and what are the benefits of doing the shadow work and reading a book on shadow work in this particular format? Quote from the book, Introduction. A right relationship with the shadow offers us a great gift to lead us back to our buried potentials. Through shadow work, a term we coined to refer to the continuing effort to develop a creative relationship with the shadow, we can, bullet points, achieve a more genuine self-acceptance based on a more complete knowledge of who we are, diffuse the negative emotions that erupt unexpectedly in our daily lives, feel more free of the guilt and shame associated with our negative feelings and actions, recognize the projections that color our opinion of others, heal our relationships through more honest self-examination and direct communication. I really like that one. Direct communication, such a skill to develop. Shadow work will help you with that. And use the creative imagination via dreams, drawing, writing, and rituals to own the disowned self. Final quote from the page, end of the introduction. The shadow is both the awful thing that needs redemption and the suffering redeemer who can provide it. And I think that's a wonderful place to end this video. Meet in the Shadow by pretty much everyone on the cover. It's a group effort, and we appreciate the group effort because isn't it wonderful when great minds come together? The men and women who've spent decades studying can give you their information and their insights in a very digestible way and progress you further along your healing journey. Get this book. If archetypes exist, then did they evolve through natural selection? Well, that's a crucial question of Archetype, A Natural History of the Self by Anthony Stevens, first published in 1984, and what I believe to be one of the most interesting takes on the crossing point between biological reality or evolutionary psychology and Jungian theory. Anthony Stevens, who you might recognize from the other book, The Roots of War and Terror, which is also in this curriculum review. I'm going to take this opportunity to once more recommend this little black book because it's incredibly valuable. 20 years earlier, he wrote this book, and this book explores what I believe to be, again, a fascinating idea. Is the archetypal theory rooted in biological reality? This is a question that you may have not considered. It might even not be forefront of your mind, and you might think, well, what's that got to do with me healing my trauma and self-actualizing towards my ambitious future? Let me read you a quote from the book that will hopefully fascinate your senses, because this is one of those breakthrough books that needs to be in the course because of how it's going to shift your perspective of all of your ancestry and your potential going forward. You're going to be able to articulate yourself along the timeline of an individual human life, because if we realize, and as Anthony Stevens realized, someone who's interested in evolutionary ethnography and also Jungian ideas, we are always living out the archetypal reality, some would say through the collective unconscious. But let me read a quote from the book, from chapter 3 on the archetypal hypothesis. Core idea, core theme of the book, biological reality and psychological reality coming together. Here's the explanation in Anthony Stevens' words. The archetypal endowment with which each of us is born presupposes the natural life cycle of our species, archetypes being biological reality. First, we are being mothered, and then we explore the environment, we're playing in the peer group, then we have adolescence, then we're being initiated, then we're establishing a place in the social hierarchy, then we're courting and marrying and child rearing, we're hunting, we're gathering, we're fighting, we're participating in religious rituals, and we're assuming the social responsibility of advanced maturity in our elder years, and ultimately we're preparing for death. Quote from Jung, every individual life is the same as the eternal life of the species. A little bit more on the page. The human being is therefore a psychophysical system with a built-in biological clock. Its structure and life cycle is predetermined by the evolutionary history of its genes, and the biological clock ticks away as the life cycle unfolds. So the system accepts and incorporates into itself the life experience of the individual. But what you and I experience as a whole process is only the end result. We are aware only of the ontogenetic (personal development) aspects of our own maturation, being largely unconscious of the phylogenetic blueprint on whose basis it proceeds. And this is going into behavior theory and the variety of evolutionary psychology. But that key idea there of the phylogenetic baseline of which we emerge from. We were all children and we all had certain patterns, and whether you want to go too deep into behavioral theory or something like even attachment theory or child psychology, there might be an element of non-linearity to human development. We can't necessarily accept that stage theories of consciousness, the idea perhaps in integral theory or something like spiral development, or even more religious ideas about the progression of souls, they might not be literally the structure from A, B, C, D, E, and once we get to F, we are enlightened. We have F'd ourselves up to the higher spheres. It might not be non-linear, but for the sake of simplicity, there are many linear patterns of archetypal unfolding that you will notice if you look back on your own history and just the way that the world works. Babies are born and they can't really do very much, but of course they're live and they're wonderful and they are full of soulful potential. And then they learn to walk, they learn to talk, they learn to do X and da 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 da. And as Anthony Stevens rightly pointed out, the archetypal reality is coded into our genes. And this book explored that idea in detail. That idea that when he returned back to Carl Jung's work, maybe it's worth going into this, how this book was written. It's always fascinating to look at how a book was written. Anthony Stevens went and did practical work, I think in infant development he was working in a Greek orphanage, if my memory serves me correctly, in the 70s or the 80s, maybe even in the 60s, and he was seeing how children attached to various surrogate mother figures. He had all this experience learning about attachment, learning about infant psychology, while also going home and putting up his feet by the fire and reading The Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious by Carl Jung and other related books. Maybe he went into the Red Book when he's feeling particularly frisky in the evenings, and he's trying to relate the two worlds that he was living in, this very practical, very human, earthy, how children are developing, and then the higher potential of archetypal realities, along with all of these wonderful Jungian ideas. And eventually it started to dawn on him through conversations with colleagues if archetypal reality is truly embedded in the collective unconscious, which is an idea that Rupert Sheldrake, the philosopher, New Age science idea, has through in blah, 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 in the morphogenetic field theory, and the idea that we have certain morphogenetic imprints or biological auric structures that have these energy components. I'm not going to go into that theory. That would take so much for me to explain. The fundamental idea is that classic, like, if one monkey on one island learns how to wash a potato, the other monkey on the other island suddenly downloads the ability to wash potatoes, and that's the simple metaphor version of how collective unconscious seems to work. You can read Rupert Sheldrake if you really want to. Read The Presence of the Past. That's the book that you want to read. For the sake of this course, and this material, and me being on track, you want to stay with this book, because this book is going to give you that wonderful, windy road through biological reality and psychological reality as you start to realize that if an archetype exists as a psychological truth, and it exists as a spiritual, amorphous, somewhere in the ether kind of truth, it probably has a physical grounding too. Certain archetypes start to switch on at certain moments in our journey. For example, a young man may be more connected to the warrior archetype, and when he reaches older life, he goes into the magician or the wizard archetype. A young woman may be particularly connected with the maiden, as would be appropriate when she hasn't started engaging with men or women. And then as she goes into her midlife, she might be truly tapped into Aphrodite-style nature, and all of these archetypal Greek goddesses, Greek myths, all start to come in as we go across the time span of life. The reason that it seems almost stumbly as I'm trying to explain this is that the reason I recommend these books in the course is that you need to climb that spiral staircase yourself. I can't capture decades of work and 300 pages of tight exploration that went through round after round of editing in an articulated 10-minute capture. It just won't work. You need to go on the journey yourself, and if you're looking for an interesting read that will open up your perspectives and maybe make some connections between the somatic therapy and the personal trauma healing as well as the Jungian and transpersonal spaces, this book forms the bridge between those realities, and it's worthwhile for you to take a week of your reading and just focus on this. So once more, highly recommended, Archetype by Anthony Stevens. Are you even healing if you're not healing the child within? Today we're discussing Healing the Child Within by Charles Whitfield. This is the 1989 reprint of the 1987 classic that you will not want to miss if you're serious about healing the inner child. And if you're watching this video and you don't know what the inner child is, I would be incredibly surprised, because it's one of the most popularized concepts in the world of inner work. It's become mainstream. Reparenting and looking after our inner child and healing the inner child are very common, almost introductory level, but definitely not beginner if you go all the way into it, but introductory concepts that get people through the threshold of internal psychological integration. But why this book? Why this book in particular? Out of all the books on the inner child work, why a book from 1987? Well, I believe that Charles Whitfield, whose lovingly reassuring face we can see on the back, and his, 2 decades of experience in the space, is worth more than somebody who's learnt their inner child healing from YouTube videos and social media. I'll let Charles Whitfield explain in his own words that this concept is not something new. In fact, I'm going to read to you from the very first page in the book on the introduction, and we'll frame today's conversation. I'll bring out a few things here and there. If you already believe that you know everything about the inner child, do stick around, because we're going to go into some things that might open up new possibilities in your awareness. Quote from the book: "The concept of the child within has been a part of our world culture for at least 2,000 years. Carl Jung called it the divine child, and Emmett Fox called it the wonder child. Psychotherapists Alice Miller and Donald Winnicott refer to it as the true self," which I have issue with, but still, we'll come back to that. Raquel Lerner and others in the field of chemical dependence call it the inner child. The child within refers to that part of each of us which is ultimately alive, energetic, creative, and fulfilled. It is our real self, who we truly are. I'll let Charles Whitfield explain himself before I criticize that concept a little bit. "With our parents' unknowing help and society's assistance, most of us deny our inner child. When this child within is not nurtured or allowed freedom of expression, a false or codependent self begins to emerge. We begin to live our lives from a victim stance and experience difficulties in resolving emotional trauma. The gradual accumulation of unfinished mental and emotional business can lead to chronic anxiety, fear, confusion, emptiness, and unhappiness. Denial of the child within and the subsequent emergence of a codependent self are particularly common among children and adults who grew up in troubled families, such as those where there was chronic physical or mental illness, rigidity, coldness, or lack of nurturing, all being common factors." And throughout this book, as you very much expect, we have chapters like Chapter 8, which give us very practical guidelines towards healing the inner child. I can briefly go through that before discussing in more detail. 4 steps to heal the inner child and access the real self. Step number 1, discover and practice being our real self or child within. Step number 2, identify our ongoing physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual needs and practice getting these needs met with safe and supportive people. Number 3, great advice so far, identify, re-experience, and grieve the pain of our unexperienced losses or traumas in the presence of safe and supporting people. Real emphasis there on grief work, very important. And finally, step number 4, identify and work through our core issues described below. And this is a wonderful book with many great diagrams, I think, in here as well as nice tables. Yeah, here's some nice tables about things that people hear in their childhood and things that people tend to say. You can pause and look at that if you want to. Point is, I think this is one of the best inner child healing books out there on the library marketplace of world information. However, I do have issue with inner child books overall, which I need to mention if I'm going to be intellectually honest with you. There's a true difference between the inner child and the true self. The real self is not the inner child. And if you're saying, well, that goes against some of the ideas I've heard, that accessing the inner child, as Charles Whitfield rightfully says, is the true self. It's just not the case. Let me illustrate. Are you more of your true self when you're born, when you're age 5, when you're age 10? True self age 10, true self when you're born, true self when you're 20, when you're 40, when you're 67, or when you're 89? At which point in your timeline are you your most true self? When are you your real self? It's a trick question. You aren't your real self more so at a certain age rather than another age, because self-identity and self-expression is a lifelong process like a flowing river. You wouldn't go to a river in the mountain pass and say, yes, this particular bend of the river is the true river. I don't like that part with the rocks over there, and I'm not keen on the waterfall part, but this particular spot where it narrows in and there's nice pine trees on either side, and I think I might have just seen an otter come through, and that was particularly peak experience for me. That's the true river. It's not. It's all the river. All of you is all of you, and the idealization and the pedestalization of the inner child is something which is healing. It's healing to acknowledge that unresolved childhood traumas and the diminishing of healthy, golden child consciousness is wounding. But I can't make a course that features inner child work without also having a very realistic, very grounded awareness that if you've experienced a crappy childhood, you will not have enough emotional anchoring to the positive, divine, radiant inner child. So as an adult, you'll look back to an imagined and almost heavily grieved childhood that never was, and you'll try and clutch at this idea of the inner child being your true self, but you'll never find it. I made this mistake for a very long period of time. I saw glimpses of the beautiful 10-year-old boy that I was before the depression started to hit, and I saw moments in my childhood where I was hurt, emotionally abandoned, or otherwise in a compromised situation. And it's important to go back through active imagination work and through some of the steps that Charles Whitfield describes to actually heal those wounds, to take the inner toddler, the inner prepubescent, the inner adolescent into our psychic system and integrate them as safe, supportive aspects of the different subpersonality network inside of us. However, don't overly pedestalize something which is in the past, because then you'll lock yourself into a regressive consciousness which will miss the possibilities for the future. You'll develop a subtle but very distinct bias towards the inner child's worldview rather than the mature elder's worldview. Neither should be prioritized, but you have to catch that middle point in between. I want you to feel like you can draw upon the playfulness and the potential and the imagined creativity of the healthy inner child, and also draw upon the wisdom of the inner 80-year-old or 90-year-old. I want you to have access to both ends of your personal timeline, both the real past and the imagined future, and not get fixated on either. When we start calling the inner child the true self, we miss the awareness that our self is something which expresses and unfolds over time. And it's also very contextually bound. The inner 7-year-old is not all love and light. Think of it. Think of a 7-year-old that you may have seen recently. It doesn't have to be 7. Maybe a 5 to 10-year-old boy or girl. I imagine that when you think of a little boy or girl, you probably imagined a nice, polite boy or girl, or maybe a fun moment, maybe a niece and nephew, the neighbor's kid, and they're kind of fun and silly and they say silly things. Also remember the moments when they're being incredibly difficult and maybe they've yet to learn how to control their emotions, so they punch another child, or they start biting or hitting or screaming. I'm not saying that that's morally evil or bad, but it's understanding that there is a dark side of human nature and a light side of human nature which doesn't magically switch on into awareness at age 18 or age 15. I mean, what age? And what age does a child become a moral agent in the world? Age 10? Age 5? Age 2? Maybe not age 2, but maybe age 5. We don't know. It's not the conversation that I want to go into. But the point I'm trying to illustrate is that inner child is not a singularly pedestalized golden shadow of everything that you are at your core, because I would argue that the true self, if you're looking at creative generativity and you're looking at the way to bring forward your essence, that the result of your inner work, that feeling of soulful uniqueness, that's best expressed when you're an adult, because you have the maturity, the resources, and the communicative skills to organize the world and organize your thoughts in a way which makes a difference. The 10-year-old artistic genius, who then becomes the 40-year-old artistic genius and has practiced all the way through, is still the same person, but they're also very different. If the 40-year-old has access to the inner divine child who was drawing pictures of horses and dogs and cats with a high degree of skill, surprisingly at age 10, and they followed that inner child ambition, that feeling of naturalness, that feeling of giftedness, and became an incredibly talented painter or artist or sculptor, they are in touch with their inner child, but they have included and transcended the inner child consciousness. They've used the resources and the capabilities of adulthood to honor that inner child nature. And again, like the front cover of the book, the inner child lives within us. The child is within. You don't want to become archetypally possessed by the child. You don't want to make all of your decisions as if the inner child were running the captain's seat. something that I've actually noticed in several clients over the years. When they go deep, and I understand this, but when they go deep enough into their inner child work, sometimes they'll come to a session and they'll almost have this shame-based response or this guilty feeling that they're not honoring their inner child. And yes, they do need to sit down and work on the business today. And yes, they do have that difficult conversation with their romantic partner later in the evening, but the inner child doesn't want to do any of that. They want to go out and play in the mud, and they want to go to the gym, and they want to go and sing songs and do all of these childish things, which aren't bad, but it's the appropriateness of how long, how often, and where in the day as an adult do we integrate that consciousness. Structured playtime, when you're healing from an inner child-based perspective, could mean organized sport with other adult men if you're a man, or adult woman if you're a woman, or maybe you do mixed gender things, but usually for the inner child, there's actually a lot of healing about same-sex relationships. It's very interesting. There's a whole variety of ways we could take the inner child relationships, but young boys who have a feeling of not fitting in with other boys then need an experience as an adult of fitting in with other adult men, and the same is true for girls. It's often like the inner friendship wounds that you can work through. But if you focus on that to the detriment of your other adult areas of life, and you prioritize play and connection and joy and sporty engagement where you're jostling around with other men or other women, and you lose your business or you lose your relationship or you forget to do the boring adult things like organizing your taxes or making sure that you're eating properly, your inner child will be hurt. The responsible way to reparent yourself is to do this. Inner child plus inner idealized mother and inner idealized father. Everyone's in this idealistic triad, and you depotentiate or draw the energy out of the idealizations to create realistic and healthy internal images. The healthy, alive, vibrant inner child, the healthy, alive, and vibrant inner mother, and the radiant father. Father consciousness, mother consciousness, the feminine principle, the masculine principle, and the almost androgynous childlike principle up to a certain age, especially age 2, age 3, there's a more androgynous element of potential in a young toddler. Boys and girls often look the same, but then they start to develop. Important point there. 2-year-old, 5-year-old, 10-year-old, 15-year-old, not the same creature at all. Draw in the energy of both archetypes. Draw in the unconditional love, or as close to unconditional love as you can, of the idealized mother, which is, there, Jordan, it doesn't matter how you did at school, I love you no matter what. But then also the love of the father, which is, Jordan, I love you, but you still didn't do good enough in this test, and there's going to be a consequence. I.e. the game that we were going to go to, or the theme park that we were going to go to on the weekend. We had this conversation, and you needed to get above this grade. You actually got this grade, and I know that you're worth so much more. I know that you're a hard worker, and next time we're going to get it. Let's make sure that we focus on it this time. We're not going to go to a theme park. We need to focus a bit more on studies, but next time we'll get it. That healthy father energy, which is very distinct from mother energy. You've probably got experiences like this yourself. There's a difference. Of course, the healthy father draws upon elements of the healthy mother, and the healthy mother will be able to set down conditional elements of this is where you need to be, and if you're below the standard, then we need to change this based on the good of the child and the good of the family and all of the healthy boundaries and standards that we need to mature. Not punitive, not abusive. That's a whole different story. For the sake of illustrating how to reparent from the idealized inner mother and the idealized inner father to these multiple inner children within, it's a practice and a process and realizing the fluidity of your identity. You can read Healing the Inner Child, Healing the Child Within by Charles Whitfield, and there's a variety of, very practical, very expressive ways to contact all of that energy. But the end point of the book is very much what I'm talking about in this review, because to integrate this information, it has to be a lived process. But a lived process in the right proportion. We'll go back to the example of my client who really wants to go and play rather than do the work at business or be a present partner for their romantic relationship. You draw upon the inner child's wisdom in a moment of conflict or in a moment of playfulness or a moment of free time, if it's appropriate. Appropriateness and contextuality are the deciding factors of adult consciousness, and adult consciousness caught between inner child consciousness and elder consciousness requires that ability to discern, is this the time to let my inner child run wild, or should I maybe go into active imagination, or at the very least, make some kind of internal promise of, I'm going to sit down with my inner child, even just a moment to decide, like, you know what, let's imagine that I thoroughly hated filming this for you. I don't hate that. I'm very much enjoying this. I'm going to pretend that I really didn't want to do this. I just don't want to film anymore. Really hate this. My inner child wants to go and take a very long barefoot walk in nature. I can honor that inner child need by doing it after the filming. Or if I really couldn't do it today, do it tomorrow. And then you build trust and respect with yourself and your own inner child by following through on the conversations. And if you had an abusive childhood in one way or another, or things were uncertain in communication, that actually starts to heal the inner child via relationship, because you're the person as an adult who does things which you say are going to be done, and that creates safety and security. The essence of creating a healthy, energetic, but also safe and also playful, also expansive, truly nurturing inner child landscape is the same exact principle as being a healthy parent. So if you know how to be a healthy parent, or you're willing to learn how to be a parent, and even someone who's 20 without kids, to still learn what it means to be a healthy parent and reparent your inner child from that loving place of, I'm going to integrate this really significant part of my psyche. That's such a worthwhile journey. I truly believe that Healing the Child Within by Charles Whitfield is one of the best books out there, and you would be doing your inner child a great disservice to not pick this up for yourself. So, you know what to do. These are all the books that Alexander Lowen wrote in his many decades of work, and we need to focus on the foundation of this stack right at the bottom, the betrayal of the body, because you don't need to read all 12 of Alexander Lowen's texts to understand the basic premises of bioenergetics and the somatic self-healing process of movement and awareness, gesture, touch, and mobilization of the physical form. Today we're looking at The Betrayal of the Body by Alexander Lowen, which was written, there's a variety of versions, but the material's from 1967. This is my number one recommendation for your entry point into bioenergetic self-therapeutic trauma work. Bioenergetics, if you don't know, if you haven't watched the main lessons just yet, bioenergetics is without a doubt the single most transformative therapeutic modality that I have personally experienced. So I'm putting my bias out into the open. I had a series of bioenergetic workshops in London many years ago. I went to some group spaces and did some things, but even back when I was 17, 18, I started to come into this idea of bioenergetic reality. Before I committed to the healing path, I'd heard of the idea, and the idea of mobilizing my body, breaking myself out of that collapse response physically, literally, with fitness and training and posture, was life-saving. I cannot speak highly enough about Alexander Lowen. If you've been one of my clients, it is very, very, very unlikely that you have survived the intensity of my 4-month mentorship process without this book ending up on your bookshelf. Alexander Lowen, in page after page after page of wisdom, drops the gold straight into your lap. My second read of this book is over 40 pages of typed notes. I cannot do justice more highly to Lowen and his very revolutionary way of working with the bodily trauma. These are the other 11 books that he's written. Many of them you do not need to read. Please take my word for it. Betrayal of the Body is the place to go. This book will help you to understand patterns of depression and anxiety, feelings of inabilities to cry or inabilities to push out or be rageful, having stuckness in your throat and not being able to express, having sexual shutdown or sexual overcharge, being way too flirty, way too erotic, or the exact opposite. Basically every common ailment that you could imagine when it comes to energetic disturbances, Lowen brings out a perspective followed by a potential practical cure. He goes through a variety of bioenergetic postures, which you've seen in the lessons perhaps at this point. I just cannot speak highly enough about Lowen. His work has a very special place in my heart, not just because of the personal bias, which I'm happy to share with you. The way that he writes, although he's got some ideas which are clearly outdated, and of course a really obvious element of that is he has very outdated 1960s views on homosexuality. You can feel free to skip over them. I don't agree with them personally, but the 99% of his work is so revolutionary and so true, deeply true to the core. I notice week in, week out when I'm working with clients and they have this pattern of really opening their eyes or shutting their eyes or tightening their jaw or sitting there with an open mouth. Or they clench up, or they lean back, they lean forward, something happens with their hands, they do one thing and say another. All of that ability to work therapeutically with clients in session and the moment-by-moment physical reality of the therapeutic space is informed to the largest degree by my bioenergetic self-education and going through the experiences over many, many years with myself. I learned how to dance, I learned how to scream, I learned how to punch, and most importantly of all, how to cry. I didn't cry for many, many years, and this kind of work allowed me as a man who learned how to bottle it all up to finally release the fucking agony that we often deny as men. And women can benefit from this too. It's a truly top 10 book in my library, so I will leave it in your hands. If this hasn't been encouraging enough, then I don't know what more I can do. The Betrayal of the Body by Alexander Lowen. You're going to absolutely love this one. Because I do, and we have the same tastes, I imagine, or near enough the same tastes. Get the book. Codependence by Charles Whitfield, published in 1991, and if you recognize the name, then you might recognize the face, because Charles Whitfield also wrote Healing the Child Within, which is also in the course and what I believe to be the best inner child workbook out there in existence from having read many books on the topic. And if you're going to learn about codependence and your anxious attachments, your people-pleasing, your nice guy behaviors, your surrogate kind of I don't matter, don't worry about me, whatever you need kind of patterns, you're best looking towards someone who writes a book a few years after writing this kind of book because they understand childhood wounding. This book isn't just for people pleasers and nice guys and good girls who don't want to rock the boat and have all of those kinds of anxious, dysfunctional attachments. It's for anyone who struggles with addiction as well. I'm going to show you a few highlights from the book. This is the kind of book that has many incredible diagrams in. This is the iceberg model of wounding and pain. You can pause it and look at it. There's also many other diagrams in the book which are almost complex, but actually, I mean, this one goes over multiple pages, and then we've got one just a few pages later, which has all kinds of consciousness and unconsciousness dynamics. I'll just let the diagrams speak for themselves. This book is loaded with information, but Charles Whitfield fundamentally makes a connection which is often missed in a lot of the modern research or modern conversation that you see online about codependency. I'm not going to include a book in this course if I don't believe it to be genuinely the best book on the topic, based on what I've found so far. I'm sure in 10 years' time, I may have a different book that I've come across, but I think this is the one. And let me read you a quote from the book to hopefully make some connections that you haven't actually connected just yet. Because I know that when I read this book, although it was a few years deep into my healing journey, it was something which really connected the dots and did at least the work of 3 or 4 other books, because of how masterful Charles Whitfield is, and I think it's because he really understands the inner child in particular. But a quote from the book. What is codependence? Codependence is not only the most common addiction, it is the base out of which all of our other addictions and compulsions emerge. Underneath nearly every addiction and compulsion lies codependence, and what runs them is twofold: a sense of shame, that our true self is somehow defective or inadequate, combined with the innate and healthy drive of our true self to realize and express itself. The addiction, compulsion, or disorder becomes the manifestation of the erroneous notion that something outside of ourself can make us happy and fulfilled. What a wonderful foundation to work from. When we really understand the meaning of codependency, we start to unravel all of those compulsive, addictive, obsessive patterns that also relate us to substances, work environments, screen time, or even just different ways to escape our own trauma. Codependency isn't something which is reserved just for, the battered, this is kind of the stereotype, the battered and downtrodden doormat wife who always does whatever the husband, tells her to do in this kind of incredibly abusive dynamic. I think a lot of men avoid researching codependency because if they search codependency or they start to understand what codependency is, most of the material out there is targeted towards women who are unfortunately in abusive relationships, but that's missing a lot of the gold within this kind of psychological study. Of course, I want women to be in healthy relationships and not be abused in their romance, but I also want men to feel like they can move into this space and get a deeper understanding of things, especially around addiction or screen addiction or even video game addiction, or maybe going out to the bar too often. That same psychological inquiry can be taken deeper into so many more areas of life, and that feels like my job in this curriculum review. I'm going to read you a few codependency characteristics just to highlight some of the value in this book, but also a little mini teaching moment. What is codependency? In a nutshell, here are 12 characteristics or assumptions from Charles Whitfield. Codependence has at least 12 cardinal characteristics. Number 1, it is learned and acquired. It is developmental. It is outer-focused. It is a disease of lost selfhood. Number 5, it is a personal boundary distortion. Critical understanding. When you understand that the boundaries between you and other or you and substance aren't quite grounded in the way that they need to be for secure relational exchange, you start to really dissolve the codependency undercurrents. Number 6, codependency is a feeling disorder, manifested especially by emptiness, low self-esteem and shame, fear, anger, confusion, and numbness. Number 7, it produces relationship difficulties with self and with other. Number 8, it is primary. Number 9, it is chronic. Number 10, it is progressive. Number 11, it is malignant. And number 12, it is treatable. Charles Whitfield was writing this book at a period of time where Alcoholics Anonymous and the various 12-step programs had started to really come into their stride. It'd been about 10-15 years of them gaining popularity, and especially in the 1990s they started to become something which almost went mainstream. I'm not sure if mainstream is the exact terminology, but taking that initial terminology of the codependent within the alcoholic scenario, classically speaking, within the literature, codependency came, or was coined within the alcoholic abusive dynamic, that the alcoholic would be this figure and the codependent would be attached almost like as an enabler kind of person. The psychology started to unravel over time. This book is designed for people who are deeply interested, professionals as well, helpers, counselors, anyone who's working with addiction. You're going to love this book because you'll be able to help your clients better. But anyone who's interested in a proper therapeutic deep dive into their own dysfunctions and obsessions, and also wants to benefit from genuinely page after page after page of highlight-worthy reflections on the deeper wounding of the codependent. I can't cover all of it in this curriculum review. I could probably do a whole video series on healing codependency, but for the sake of this course, this is a book that I want you to read for yourself. Take a whole week and read this book, and as important as the Healing the Child Within book is, you could even read both books at once and start to make the connections between the two of them, which is especially useful if you're reading the same author, because their style of presenting ideas gets fleshed out across the spectrum. It's a worthwhile endeavor, and I suppose I'll just finish this video by saying once more, I recommend that you check out Codependence by Charles Whitfield, because I can't resist. How could you not want to learn about emotional inner healing from a man who looks just this sharp? I couldn't resist personally, and I doubt you can either. This is another one of those angry curriculum reviews because I wish that I had have read Psychosynthesis by John Furman and Angela, published in 2002, at least 4 years ago. This is without a doubt the best book on psychosynthesis, the transpersonal understanding of human development, developed by Roberto Assaigoli at the same time as Freud and Jung and Adler, start of the 20th century, and I wish I had have encountered this so many years ago, because this is gold, pure gold. It slotted together so many of the developmental theoretical gaps that I didn't even know were there, because this book does wonderfully with diagrams. Psychosynthesis is a depth psychology of fragmentation, integration, and the layers of consciousness. But Roberto Assaigoli, who I've read, interestingly, little fun fact behind the scenes, this camera is positioned on several books, and the book at the very top. Actually, I'm going to do this. Never done this before. This book right here, Act of Will, goes beneath the camera. So he is very much imbuing all of my creations just because the book's the right size and they just happen to be the Act of Will. Very appropriate, symbolically. Psychosynthesis does what Roberto Assaigoli intended in terms of popularizing, but also retaining the depth and the authenticity of his awareness. John Furman studied directly with him, and this book, co-authored with Angela, brings out the diagrams. This diagram here, that's about the levels of human consciousness from infant to adult and how fragmentation can be brought through from level to level and layer to layer. We've got a diagram a little bit later on about the stages of the higher, middle, and lower unconscious. Let's let the camera focus right there. Pure gold. Pure gold. G-O-L-D. My frustration that I didn't read this as one of my first 20 books is out of this world. I'm not going to go deep into the curriculum. We have psychosynthesis as the higher, middle, and lower unconscious and the integration between the various stages. We have ideas that are over 100 years old but speak very freshly to the human psyche. We're looking at wounding. We're looking at primal wounding in particular, the early childhood developmental traumas. But you're in this course. You bought a course on inner work. You've heard me mention transpersonal psychology before. I can guarantee that this book is one of my top 5 books of transpersonal psychology. It's so worth you getting. I'm not going to make this a long, drawn-out video. I trust your intention. I trust your discipline. I trust your interest in reading great books. It's why you're here. This is one of those great books. Another non-negotiable read. This deserves a prime place on your bookshelf. I'll let you go into the diagrams, I'll let you go into the theory chapter after chapter. This book does at least the work of 10 books. I'm like a #1 cheerleader. I might just get out the pom-poms from the drawer and start, like cheering them out. But a living video, a short video, curriculum review, it's fantastic. It's 11 out of 10. Please get Psychosynthesis by John Furman and Angela. And also the other 5 books which you've just seen in this marathon review, including Codependence, Betrayal of the Body, Healing the Child Within, and we're not going to drop it, Archetype, and Meeting the Shadow. 6 of the 36 books from my shadow work library. If you've enjoyed this mega episode, the longest YouTube video that I've ever put on the internet, in fact I think the longest video I've ever put on the internet, then you're going to love this playlist right over here. 5 hours of free shadow work content, including more clips from the course, more exercises, more lectures, as well as an 8-part shadow work series and an entire course unboxing. I'll see you over here, and I look forward to it.